Oh, who's a good little kitty? Come over here so I can give you head pats. Anyway, hello there friends, and welcome back to more Bravely Default. Last time, we began the game again, and got to see a lot of stuff that I either missed or withheld in chapters 1 through 4, and the introduction, of course. And we made it here to the loop once more. And today, we are going to be seeing the rest of the game, and basically kind of going through the same thing again. Talking over cutscenes, giving my opinions on things, and going over some unanswered questions that the ending gives us. Kind of forget what I need to do here at the very beginning, so I think we'll just go ahead and start off the day by going to talk to the king.
A young man of spirit indeed. I saw that in you from the time you drove off that airship. I regret that this burden must fall upon you. Our forces will be ready to redeploy soon.
Right, I totally drove off an airship myself, yes. Whatever you say, Kingy boy. I guess off to the Great Chasm we go! I like how this cutscene is a mirror of Agnes and Tiz's first meeting. In their first meeting, Agnes is the one out gazing upon the chasm, and Tiz walks up to her. And in this world, it's the opposite. It's a nice, cool little reference.
What on earth is happening, Eri?
Don't worry about that. She just went ahead and slaughtered a bunch of people. Anyway, Agnes joined the party. Once again, if you want to make any adjustments to her, now you can. This whole recent Genesis thing was actually a really cool theory that I would have been okay being the actual answer to the game, where every single time the Holy Pillar is activated, what if the Holy Pillar creates a whole new world, filling everyone with memories that didn't exist mere 5 minutes ago? That's a really interesting idea. And the themes and the questions that could have been asked on, like, do we count as real? Are we real if I have 20 years of memory, but I've only existed for 1 minute? Can any of this truly be real? Like, how does that happen? That would have been a really interesting question to answer. But obviously this is not where the game took the whole loop segment, so not really anything we should dwell on. Guys, I found Elvis! He's hanging out in Caldisla. He's been jumping around worlds. So, one thing that I want to talk about, now that we have reached the loop again, is I actually want to go ahead and talk about my opinions on the loop. Now, this is a highly, I don't want to say controversial, but definitely a highly contentious subject. It's something that Bravely Default gets a lot of flack for, but also a lot of praise for. My opinions on it are kind of mixed. I see the loop as a very ambitious storytelling device that I am proud that Team Asano at least tried something very different and had a very unique spin on the whole, you know, Awaken the Four Crystals storyline from other Final Fantasies. It was something that I was really interested to see how they would put their own flair to it. And having to awaken up to 20 crystals in order to finish the story is definitely different from the standard, oh, just awaken 4 and you're done. But with that said, I think in terms of their execution, they didn't exactly land on their feet. But I guess, okay, real quick, let's go ahead and just lay some groundwork here. From chapters 5 through 8, you enter a new world from Caldisla, and every single Eternian officer is a battle. You can battle every single Eternian officer, and the world is slightly different. And sub-scenarios reactivate, and the way that you interact with characters is slightly different, as now we have a lot more context of what's going on. And so characters react differently when they see certain events play out. This happens in every single world from Chapter 5 onwards. So, what is really the problem here? Well, honestly, I agree with people when they say that the loop is not really all that interesting whenever you kind of take a deep dive into it. To give an example, in Chapter 6... Well, actually, let's start with Chapter 5. So, to give an example, Chapter 5, all of the sub-scenarios, the ones we're doing right now, are all basically mirrors of the original their original appearance in the first 4 chapters. Just with the crew understanding what's going on, and they finish out the story earlier than normal. Chapter 6, unfortunately, is practically identical, and in the original release of Bravely Default, Chapter 7 and 8 was the same way. All sub-scenarios were identical after your first foray. So, it gets really boring, and there isn't a lot of there isn't a big reason to actually go out of your way to do all the sub-scenarios, and with the alternative gameplay feature being going and awakening the crystals, which is basically you just fighting the same boss again and then mashing X over 100 times, the gameplay loop of this game gets really boring. And it isn't, obviously because it's boring, it isn't very exciting to play through, and so a lot of people quit playing the game because the story just doesn't interest them anymore. That's understandable. And honestly, I completely agree with people who quit the game after maybe getting through halfway through Chapter 6 or whatnot, because they just realize that they're just not having fun, all the sub-scenarios are kind of boring, and they just want to stop. In my opinion, personally, I'm going to go down the list of chapters and talk about my general opinions on them. When it comes to Chapter 5, I think this chapter is handled pretty well, both in story and in sub-scenarios. I think we needed a chapter that was almost a perfect mirror to our original world, to allow for the characters to be confused about their situation, and for players who wanted to go and see the sub-scenarios, they would realize that things are very similar, but there are a few hints of there being something else going on. And being able to kind of finish each story early is also a pretty cool little thing that I'm sure players would be wanting to see if they could do if they had done the story previously. Like, for example, you know, maybe if you were unable to save Officer Neuer and Steiner in the Ninja Quest line, if you go there now and you have the context of what's going to happen and you know that Kikyo is in disguise, hey, you now have the chance to save them. That is a really cool gameplay feature, and it's a awesome narrative tool. Chapter 5, I think, nails what they were going for, what they were intending to do with Chapter 5. I think they nailed it perfectly. But from Chapter 6 onward, I think there are some issues. Let's start by talking about Chapter 6. So, in Chapter 6, we start to get the revelation that Eri is not who she seems, and we get Ringabel trying to slowly convert all of the Warriors of Light over to his theory that Eri is not what she seems. I think in terms of the main story, this is a pretty good chapter. We get to finally figure out what might be going on. We get we get full confirmation that we are within parallel worlds, and we also now have a pretty good idea of who the big bad is and what we need to do to stop her. You also get the ability to start breaking crystals in Chapter 6, and I think that is a wonderful option for each time you see a crystal. It kind of looms in the back of your head, whether or not you want to do this or not. Where I think Chapter 6 falls short is its sub-scenarios. Outside of the Conjure quest line, the sub-scenarios are basically the exact same from Chapter 5, which isn't needed because we had the whole, oh, well, we've seen this before, what's going on kind of storyline already at this point. So it isn't needed at all. Personally, I would have liked it if we had Chapter 6's stories be somewhat similar to how they are in Chapter 7, where we see consolidated attorney and officers, where their teams are consolidated, and we fight a bunch of them at once, and we get to see them interact. Now, obviously, this is very similar to Chapters 7 and 8, but I would have preferred to see it earlier in Chapter 6. In terms of Chapter 7 and 8, because at that point, you can kind of see Chapter 7 and 8 as a... I guess reward is probably the best way of explaining this. You can kind of see Chapter 7 and 8 as a reward for sticking out for the true ending. I would have preferred if Chapter 7 and 8 took the idea of parallel worlds and the characters within them being very different and dialed it up to 11. What I mean by this is, and this is all just my personal desires and wishes, and I'm kind of just spitballing here. This is all unscripted. I'm just kind of throwing ideas at a wall, and some of these definitely would not have worked, and some of these honestly might have. But maybe if the Chapter 7 and 8, maybe if one of the chapters had the conflict in Eisenberg, the Civil War, what if that wasn't happening and the Fire Vestal was still alive and the Fire Crystal never needed to be awakened because she was still around? And instead, maybe if the conflict was moved to Florum. What if there was a civil war between the Anticrystalists and the Orthodoxy in Florum? We could have seen the conflict around the Florum Gardens and maybe the Orochi and whatnot. These creatures, this mythos, and these characters could all have very different roles in this world, but they're still the same people. They still have the same personality, and we still recognize them. We just see them in different positions. Not only that, we would also be able to interact with other major characters that were dead in previous worlds, like the Fire Vestal, or maybe Suleiman, or someone like that. Honestly, my biggest thing when it comes to the loop is that I just feel like the idea of parallel worlds was not explored well enough, even with the re-releases fixing a lot of the issues I had with it. It's still... It feels like the developers were very ambitious, and they had an idea of what they wanted to do, but they just couldn't fully execute on every idea they had, and in my opinion, that made for a worse product, just overall. I don't think this game is horrid and that the loop completely ruins the experience, but I do think that this game suffers a lot from... I don't want to say... I don't think over-ambition is a word, but, like, the developers were very, very ambitious, and I think that either this was just too much for them, or they just didn't want to take the ideas that they had to their maximum potential. Either way, though, my final opinions on this are... I don't think the loop is a game-breaking flaw with Bravely Default, personally. If it was, I wouldn't be playing it for you guys. But I have never once complained about any of my friends who have made it this far for them quitting. I've never blamed them for quitting on this game because of the loop. Because it is, without a doubt, the most difficult part of the game to get through. And if the whole parallel worlds thing doesn't really sell you pretty quickly, then it becomes difficult to stay invested in this game. If you don't like the sub-scenarios, and if you've done all of them in Chapter 5 and 6 and you realize that you're bored out of your mind and you just want to finish the game, then you're probably going to miss out on Chapter 7 and 8's pretty good sub-scenarios, which is just really aggravating. that they put the best stuff that the game has to offer behind Chapter 7 and 8, which not only requires you to want to play the game past Chapter 6, you could have shattered the crystal by that point, but it also asks that you stay patient with it. And I can guarantee you there are a lot of people who just lose their patience after the game locks you out of something really interesting for over 20 hours. That's honestly really all I have to say about the loop. I think it was a neat idea, but could have been executed better.
It's made of what?
I'm not gonna make the same joke again. Yes, drugs. Onyes versus Adia, the ultimate waifu wars. I'm going to stay impartial. Yeah, that'll get me out of trouble.
Since you're clearly incapable of managing my nickname, let's make this formal.
Yeah, we know. Captain of the Blood Rose Legion, the Red Mage, Old Man DeRosa.
Whoa, hold on there.
That is probably my favorite boss introduction in the whole game. Again, I think I mentioned this beforehand, but I just love how this game constantly goes out of its way to just make fun of DeRosa, because he's such a psychopath, and I'm glad that they really berate him as much as they can, especially because, again, he's probably one of the most horrible people in this world. Actually, across multiple worlds, he's one of the worst people imaginable. Did I ever mention that Dark Knight is kind of overpowered? Well, if I haven't, there you go. Yeah, no second Bravo bikini. This is normally where you would get it, but if you have it already, then you don't get it. So, no second Bravo bikini. Anyway, I'm not a big fan of the Bravo bikini's design anyways. I've never been a big bikini person, you know? Like, if someone asks you, oh, like, what do you like the bikini swimsuit that I have? I'm like, nah, I guess. I don't know. Bikinis aren't really that cute, in my opinion. I don't know, maybe I'm just weird. Welcome to the Witherwoods. We've got birds here. And 500p, yay! I wish I could go out into the wild and just find a treasure chest with 500 gold in it. Honestly, maybe I could. Who knows? I don't think I ever mentioned how much I love this specific art piece. Whenever we're done with this fight, I'm gonna give it its time to shine. Move out of the way, Anheria. I want to appreciate the arts! Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and just zoom out a little bit here. And let you appreciate this piece. It's a little annoying that for Chapter 5, you still have to go through the Grand Mill Works in order to actually confront Cammer. This is not something that is the case in later chapters. It's just a little annoying. It's not really that big of a deal since, thankfully, the dungeon is already complete for you, which begs the question of how that's possible, but I'm not really going to question it too much. I just now realized I was talking while I was fighting Jackal and Profiteer, and I didn't mention the pitter-patter. No! I am a disgrace to all those who love the pitter-patter.
What? You aren't running this time?
Such a reward.
Please run, please. I like to see the little pitter-patter. Please run. No. Ugh. I'm here again. Okay, I guess I'll deal with her again. I'm not gonna be happy about it.
What can I...
Let's take care of that, is right. She's no human. She's a beast. A witch! Let's burn the witch! If you couldn't tell, I really don't have a lot to add for these cutscenes and these battles, because I feel like I did a pretty good job of talking about them as we were going through them initially. So I'm kind of just going through them, and honestly,
Victor.
the interesting parts about what I want to talk about won't come until a little later. So bear with me for a moment. Why we never got that sword as a weapon drop from Brave, I will never understand. And honestly, my opinion of that continues to Lord DeRosso. Give me that damn sword! You guys have already seen how powerful vampires can be, and you've also seen how overpowered Stillness can be. Put these together along with Hasten World and you get something that is pretty powerful. The unfortunate side effect, though, against this Gigas Lich is he has our one weakness, being undead. As if you apply Drain to your weapon and you try to attack him, you're going to be hurting yourself. So, this is the weakest this composition can be. We put on Stillness, nothing's gonna hurt us.
Put your Vestal garb on, yes? It's all threadbare.
I don't see a difference, honestly.
Oh.
0 out of 10 game. No different model for a threadbare Vestal garb. I do have to say, I really like this segment of the chapter because it starts giving us a lot of extra lore. It's not much, but hey, I'll take what I can get.
Who might you be?
You don't recognize the people who look exactly like one of your oldest rivals and friends for 1,800 years. Well, I guess not really 1,800 years, but close to it. I'm not gonna dawdle on that. Whee! Into the camera she goes. Honestly, if you look at Ares' wings right now, even though the 4 we're looking at is backwards, it's pretty obvious to see the numbers. As soon as you know that they're there, you can't unsee them. Every single playthrough, you will notice them. It's hidden in plain sight. It's very well done. So, now that we have a little bit of context about the Evil One and whatnot,
Time to get started. Yeah.
what happens if we try to break a crystal in Chapter 5?
Please, Agnes. We've worked so hard to save it. Don't throw it all away. Don't you care about your friends? Aren't I your friend too? Stop! You really are going. This is my last warning. If you don't stop now, stop! Stop!
You can break the crystal in Chapter 5 once you've entered New Game Plus. Hey, you can't slaughter me, I have Stillness up! That's not fair! From this point on, the finale plays out as it would normally. Thanks to New Game Plus, you have the context of what Eri is, and you can guide the Warriors of Light to break the crystal as early as Chapter 5. Normally, this is not possible. It's pretty cool, honestly. Obviously, if you want the true ending, you have to go all the way. But if you just want to break the crystal naturally, this is where you can do it. You do have to wait until you are in the loop, though. You cannot break it in World 5. So, I guess while we're here in the finale, I want to go ahead and talk about the crystal bosses, as what they are isn't exactly explained properly. And honestly, we still don't really have a good explanation for what they are. So, I want to go ahead and talk about them now. So, just what are these creatures of doom that loom around every crystal no matter what world we find ourselves in? While we are never given a direct answer, there are 2 primary theories that the Bravely community has come up with that explains their presence in the story, with both ideas being similar in some ways, but vastly different in others. To lay a little bit of groundwork before I dive into both theories, I first want to mention that the appearance of the Doom creatures coincides with the Great Chasm being opened, meaning that they most likely have a connection to one another. Also, the Orthodoxy must somehow know of their existence in order to create the ancient scriptures that Anius references during your first encounter with each creature. So, now we get into fitting these two pieces together in a believable way. The first theory, and in my opinion the more interesting one, is that the creatures aren't malicious at all, and instead act as guardians to the crystals when a cataclysmic threat is sensed. The crystals basically put themselves in emergency shutdown mode, and have the Doom creatures act as protectors against any threat that might do the crystals harm. This would explain why the crystals are enveloped in darkness the moment the Great Chasm is opened, as the planet senses it is under attack, and the crystals seal themselves away in order to trap whatever has just arrived on the planet, forcing it to die away with a rotting world. Then, why would the Crystal Orthodoxy mark these protectors as omens of doom? Simply because if these creatures have arrived, it means that the crystals, the Orthodoxy's center of worship, are about to be shut down for fear of being under attack. Cataclysmic ruin is nigh when the omens of doom arrive, or something like that. This creates an interesting subversion of the classic Four Crystals trope, as most of the time, the crystal boss you battle usually is an entity that desires the crystal's power, so having these monsters be the crystal's protectors is pretty cool. The biggest hole in this theory, however, is that if we are to believe Eri began her quest without any chasm in the very first world, then the crystals wouldn't have needed to shut down. This can be argued with another point that I'll get to later when we talk about the ending of the game, but I wanted to mention it here anyways. The second theory, and probably the one most people accept, is that the Doom creatures are just another creation of Ouroboros, sent to give the Warriors of Light a reason to awaken the crystals and hone their strength in order to take on Brave and the rest of the Eternian officers. Once Eri arrives in a new world, Ouroboros would begin the harrowing, sending the Doom creatures off to each crystal to corrupt them, and then Eri would lead the Warriors of Light to each one, have the heroes kill them, and awaken the crystal, then hop inside the Holy Pillar, rinse and repeat. In this case, the Orthodoxy scriptures would be more accurate, and they would most likely know of their existence thanks to the sage talking to the angel, who might have mentioned them at some point with the Orthodoxy members. This theory doesn't have the issue of lacking an origin point, as it means that Eri and the creatures were cooperating from the beginning and wouldn't need to rely on the Great Chasm opening to kickstart everything. Though, it's a lot less interesting in my opinion. Man, the title of Piercer of Boundaries is such a cool thing, dude. I wish it had Piercer of Boundaries Eri on her actual, name in battle, rather than it just being Eri, but that's a small nitpick. Yes, Anius, we know that you have a nice, shiny, green, glowing axe. Now, can you please put it down and start hitting Eri? Hey, Anius got the final hit in! That's pretty fitting. I like how the death flare animation right here just stays during the victory screen. Trust me when I say that our time with this game is not done, and if you look at the time of the video, we still have a lot to talk about. So I will see you once the credits have rolled, and we're back on the title screen. So once the ending has finished up, you get this prompt. Save clear game data? Sure! Continue your journey in search of new horizons. Game completion bonus, Anius can now equip the Vestal Garb. And we can begin right back at Chapter 5. This plops us into Rende Ravine, similar to whenever you begin the post-game of the true ending. If you look at the brooch, it is just before we awaken to the Fire Crystal. And now, Anius can equip the Vestal Garb. We'll be having us on her for the remainder of the journey. And we begin in Chapter 6, A World of Echoes, Equal. The reason why it's called A World of Echoes Equal is because not only is it an echo of our original world, but the equal part requires a little bit more explanation. Personally, I think what it means is it's supposed to be short for equilibrium, balance, so to speak. If the Warriors of Light were to stay here, their lives would be in perfect balance. They would have everything they would have wanted. That's my personal interpretation, and hey, we got the blue key there. We can go unlock those pesky blue chests now. I'm gonna be perfectly honest here, this is probably the chapter I have the least to talk about. In terms of the sub-scenarios, there's nothing new compared to Chapter 5 that we haven't already seen and I've mentioned. And I have already gotten everything I wanted to talk about with the crystal bosses already out of the way. So, I think I'm going to go ahead and awaken a few crystals, we'll do the Conjurer questline, talk about a few things there, and then it'll be good to move on. So, I'll see you right there. So I want to go ahead and begin the Conjurer quest again, mostly because I like this one. This is probably my favorite sub-scenario in the entire game because it asks an interesting question. And honestly, that question I would like to pose to you. If you were in the Warrior of Light's shoes right now, and you have been given a world of that fulfills your every dream, if you have a family member that was wrongfully taken from you, they are alive in this world. If you wanted to have a position of power that you've always desired, this world will give you that. If this was a world that you could live in, would you take it? Or would you continue on your journey of awakening the crystals and going to foreign worlds that you have no idea what's going to happen in? Honestly, for most of my playthroughs and most of my life, I would probably take the Sage's offer. I would probably stay here in my ideal world. But as I've grown older and realized that the trials that I've been through in my life have shaped me to who I am, and that the effort I've put into my work and my life has been worth the pain, I definitely agree with the Warriors of Light, and I think that's what they're trying to showcase, is that with effort in your life, with effort, you grow to appreciate what you have and value it, even if it's not everything you want. But I'm interested to see if any of you would take this option. Every version of Alternus cares deeply for his version of Edea. But they all know that deep down, every single one of them would take care of any version of Edea, which is why Alternus is perfectly okay passing the torch to another version of himself. It's a strange connection that they all have, and they understand each other perfectly. Hey, Olivia. No hard feelings about the whole letting you die in the previous chapters, right? Good.
The Witch Victoria.
If you were curious, no, Olivia does not come back to the Matriarch after you finish this segment of the Contra quest line. She just disappears for narrative purposes. I guess you can't go around and talk to her again. It's a little disappointing. Once again, we face off against our greatest foe, the Kobolds! Truly the most dangerous enemy of all. Don't forget, if you're about to go fight the Sage in the Contra quest line, you can actually just use his beds to heal without any cost. It's quite useful, especially since Sage Ilyana is pretty difficult. But with the Conjure questline done, that's pretty much it to see here in Chapter 6 that I wanted to talk about. Again, pretty barren chapter. I feel like I covered all of the notes that I needed to pretty well in the main playthrough. So we begin Chapter 7, A World of Echoes, Dash. Dash is right, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be dashing through this world. There are a few pit stops that I want to make, but otherwise, this will be another quicken.
Good morning.
That would be old man TikTok.
Honestly, dealing with the very, very annoying Praline is absolutely worth it so we can hear one of the best lines in the entire game.
Yeah. What so? I am king, boy! King.
I love that line so much, and now they all die. You have amused me for the final time, Cammer, and for that, I appreciate you. But now you must die. I just want to say, with the added context of Mephilia and Suleiman's connection, and the fact that Captain Barbarossa basically took on as acting captain for Suleiman's ship, makes this cutscene a lot more heartwarming. Barbarossa is basically a surrogate chaperone of some sorts for Mephilia and took on the reins of helping her find Susanoo for the late Suleiman. It makes just this battle all the more heartwarming because these two have been through a lot and have a connection to Suleiman, which is a person we never even really got to meet. But we understand just how much he meant to these two people. And of course, Juliana's here too. I still honestly think this is probably one of the harder Asterisks battles just in general, even including the entirety of the Chapter 8 boss rush. Just because Juliana and Barbarossa are a very dangerous pair. And then the fact that Mephilia has access to Susanoo in this chapter makes it to where her non-elemental damage just cannot be mitigated at all other than stillness. It's just a pretty dangerous combination, which is why I decided to use it as an example of how to cheese encounters. Despite the fact that it is a very difficult encounter, and being able to beat it legitimately is definitely something you should be proud of. The Flory Dwelling is another one of those pieces, those art pieces, that I just absolutely adore. One thing that I didn't notice for a long time is that this is like nice land right here, but then this is like a puddle, and you can see the water splashing. You don't really see this in the cutscenes or whenever you're walking around because you don't really go here all that often. Also, I'm gonna let it zoom out so you can see the full piece. And in Chapter 7, you can see the little girls' club meeting on the far edge of this awesome art piece. Anyway, let's go beat them up. You know, I may hate Praline with a burning passion because she's so annoying, but I have to admit that this is one of my favorite Easter eggs in the entire game. But something I didn't do the last time I showed this off is that I didn't talk to this old man right here. Shut up! I'm gonna try to talk to someone! Keep it down, man. Lately, I've been feeling more energetic, like I'm ready to go wild! Maybe I should see a doctor. Yeah, you might have what I like to call Pralinitis. It's fatal. It makes you incredibly addicted to crappy J-pop. See your medical professional if you feel like you have Pralinitis immediately. Honestly, once again, Chapter 7 doesn't really have much for me to show. I feel like I kind of covered all of the bases pretty well. Though, seeing some of my personal favorite lines of dialogue and cutscenes is pretty nice. And the whole Suleiman kind of finishing up the whole Suleiman questline was pretty nice. But on to Chapter 8 we go.
Oh, wondrous and beautiful.
This next chapter doesn't, once again, does not really have all that much. A World of Echoes Circle. Which circle might be a reference to the Ouroboros circle, as we kind of see ourselves going in circles, and Ouroboros represents an infinite cycle. And I think that's usually what it's trying to say. To give a brief mention of World of Echoes Dash, I think the reason why it's called Dash is because, honestly, I am looking at my notes on like what I might have said, and I said, make it up. So I think it's called the World of Echoes Dash because maybe the translators were really into The Incredibles at the time they were making it, and they liked the speedster in that film and wanted to name a chapter after him. I don't know. If you have any reasons for why they may have called it Dash, I'm interested to hear it. But anyway, getting back on topic, for Chapter 8, there really isn't too much to see again, but we do have the boss rush here. So we have to go around and unlock that again, which I would suggest running the composition that I am right now, which is 3 vampires spamming Firestorm and a Spirit Master to have Hasten World and spam Stillness. And you'll get through all that stuff pretty easily, and moving on to the boss rush, it won't be that bad. Lady, please get your eyes checked. Oh, sorry, by the way, she was about to say, sadly, Lady Olivia has gone into hiding. Again, if you try to look for her, you will not find her. She's really, really good at hiding in these past 2 chapters for some reason. It would have been really nice if she was better at that in our original world. But then again, I guess it was partially our fault for her dying anyways. I guess while I'm here, I'll go ahead and beat up the Bloodrose Legion. Once again, these cutscenes make me really wish we could have like guest party members in this game, and Mephilia, Einherja, and Artemia all become guest party members, and we literally beat the shit out of DeRosa. Like, it's not even supposed to be a challenge. You just beat the crap out of him. It would help kind of sell the fact that, you know, this game goes out of its way to constantly mock and make fun of DeRosa for being a horrible person by just completely demeaning everything he does. And having a 7v1 would be the ultimate, for lack of a better phrase, fuck you to his character. And I would have loved that. The OG 4 Final Fantasy 1 jobs. The Knight, the Monk, the Black Mage, and the White Mage. Unfortunately, they went for balance, while I went for being super duper overpowered. So these jabronis are gonna go down without much issue. I actually really like the gimmick of this fight. The fact that there's 4 bosses on screen, which is the most that can be on screen at the same time. And that whenever one of them goes down, Kamiyuzumi takes in their spot. Obviously, the main plan is to just kill them all without needing to worry about Kamiyuzumi, and therefore, you would only have to basically do a 1v4 against him. Which is the hope with this part, but just playing through the game normally, I was really taken by surprise whenever I defeated Praline first, and all of a sudden, oh hey, Kamiyuzumi was right there. I was actually expecting Kamiyuzumi to be like a phase 2, where you would defeat all 4 of these Black Blades, Kamiyuzumi would come back to like, oh no, all my allies have fallen, and then all of a sudden, like, Kata kicks in like a potion, and Barbarossa and he and Barbarossa pick themselves back up, and it's Barbarossa, Kata, and Kamiyuzumi versing you, but Kikyo and Praline are like still down and whatnot. When you revisit Vampire Castle in Chapter 8, I'm actually quite disappointed that Sage Juliana won't kind of chime in if you were to read the paintings and give his own interpretations of what happened. I get that they were trying to keep his involvement in the next upcoming boss fight a secret, but maybe after the battle you can walk back to some of the paintings and you'd be like, oh yes, I remember when this happened. Here's what happened on my side of the story, especially when it comes to him making all the asterisks and monopolizing that so the Orthodoxy can't monopolize it. It would have been nice to get a little bit of extra lore, but it's a minor nitpick. I don't know if it's just me, but I've always kind of seen these two's friendship as like it's such an ancient friendship, and they're so old that it always just reminds me of like 2 old men that always come together for their weekly night of Scrabble or something, and they do nothing. They don't even play the game. They just sit there and bicker like an old married couple. It's just an idea. It's a visual I've had in my head for a decade now, and now you can see it too. These 2 old people playing Scrabble on Friday nights. There you go. But with that final sub-scenario done, all that's left to do now is the Eternian boss rush that took us 2 episodes. But, spoiler alert, I'm not going to be doing that today, and instead I'm going to be leaving that for the next episode. Instead, I think it is best if we go ahead and finish the game here and now, and talk about the last few things I want to discuss. So, let's head into the Holy Pillar for our official final time. Bravely Default. The courage to disobey. Well, that's what bravely means. Default, in the title of Bravely Default, means the courage to hold on to your own ideals. The normal ending of Bravely Default is the bravely, or the courage to disobey in the name, where we were finally able to disobey Ares' commands and shatter the crystal following our own path. But if we were to default, even though we know Ares is the true villain, even though we know what might lie ahead of us, we hold fast until it's our time to strike. Until we are at our absolute strongest. that's basically what the dichotomy of the two endings are. If you were to disobey Ares' commands prematurely, you are taking action, you are braving. And it still gives you a very positive ending, but it does not solve everything. However, if you were to default, if you were to grit your teeth, if you were to hold fast and wait for the perfect opportune moment to present itself and then take it, that is what gives you the greatest outcome of all. At least that's what I have kind of that's kind of what I've come up with this storyline. And also, this is kind of on an unrelated note, but to give you an idea of what I was talking about in the previous episode, this is where I got stuck when it came to the Eri fight. I had to come back over here to the bridge and farm enemies inside of the Grand Ship deck for a long time until I was properly ready to beat Eri on easy mode. Yeah, I was kind of a dumb kid.
Oh, I fear I am Ouroboros, the Celestial Realm. It's the first I've heard of most of this.
Keep that information in mind for later.
No.
Keep in mind that Sage Ilyana mentioned that he didn't know what the Celestial Realm or Ouroboros was. Yes, I'm going to continue to say Ouroboros because their pronunciation of Ouroboros is really dumb. Sorry. Sorry, tangent. But Sage Ilyana does not recognize the name Ouroboros or Celestial Realm. The angel gave specific information to Sage Ilyana and to Lord DeRosso that they were not to share with anyone else. So there isn't anything saying that the angel did not talk to Lord DeRosso about Ouroboros or the Celestial Realm. In fact, she must have, because Lester must have known that he would need to seal away Ouroboros' power somehow, because he knew that there was an immortal that was within the Infernal Realm. He didn't exactly need to know that the Celestial Realm existed, but he definitely knew Ouroboros did. So Ouroboros' existence must have been something that Lester knew of, but he never was able to tell the Sage. As I'm walking through the Dark Aurora, I do want to make mention that if you have shattered the crystal on a save file and you're now going through the true ending, or vice versa, you will not get double of the same loot. The treasure chests are tied to your save file playthrough, I guess is the best way to explain it. So you need to begin New Game Plus or start a new game entirely in order to get new loot. So if you want multiple of the same extremely rare item, you have to do countless New Game Plus cycles until you have as many of the item you want. If I want 8 Gugnirs from the Dimensions Past, guess what? I'm doing 8 playthroughs of Bravely Default. I can't just do 4 playthroughs of the true ending and 4 playthroughs of the fake ending, or normal ending, and be done with it. No, I have to do 8 full runs of the game. After beating the first run through of the game, though, you can do the little Chapter 5 trick I showed off, is that you can end the game as early as Chapter 5. You just need to be in the loop in order for the crystals to start breaking. In New Game Plus, again, specifically in New Game Plus. You cannot break a crystal in Chapter 5 on your very first playthrough. It only gets worse from here on in. I really do wish that the adventurer had some unique lines of dialogue here for the final battle, the last time you see the adventurer before the grand finale, instead of just the usual pre-battle dialogue. Beginning our true final battle with Eri. I only have one piece of information to talk about with her, as I covered her etymology with the real-life butterfly connections. So I want to go ahead and want you to pay attention to the right side of the screen, as yes, this butterfly version of Eri actually did get censored in Western releases. You can see the uncensored version from Japan on the right side of the screen here now. Once again, I think every single censored change made for Western releases are actually the better versions of the outfit. Yes, I mean, it loses its originality, like the original creation is not specifically in the Western releases, but especially for Eri here, I think the black outfit looks like she's being corrupted from inside out, and yes, it's supposed to be like a black leotard and leggings, but I like to think that it's like dark corruption oozing from every part of her body, and it's slowly consuming her entirety. Next, I want to talk about Ouroboros as a villain. I think as a final, last-second twist villain, Ouroboros scores a lot of good boy points for me, but a lot of bad boy points for me as well. To go over the negatives, in my opinion, Ouroboros' general plan is pretty uninspired, I guess is the best way of putting it. His entire plan for what he's doing, connecting all of the worlds, is not really all that interesting in my opinion. And honestly, I mean, trying to make it a huge grand plan based on connecting worlds and trying to make that plot somewhat interesting is going to be pretty difficult. But I do think that it's not really all that interesting. And also, Ouroboros' design is not my favorites. I think that they could have depicted the whole, serpent part of the Ouroboros symbol a little bit better. He doesn't really look like a serpent to me, and more of just like a dragon, which, to be fair, there are depictions of Ouroboros as being a dragon, but I feel like they should have leaned more into the serpent design of Ouroboros. But in terms of positives, I love his presence. He feels like an extraterrestrial threat. He feels truly like a god. He devours planets in seconds. His voice is echoing and booming, and you can feel it in your very soul. His voice actor is never even credited. I looked everywhere I could, and I couldn't find anything. But whoever did it, whoever voiced Ouroboros, hats off to you, man. And alongside the sound design team, making Ouroboros sound so intimidating. Ouroboros also has one of my favorite arenas and battle styles ever, utilizing the complete destruction of entire worlds to fight against you and heal himself. So cool. And the fact that it takes countless worlds in order to defeat him, again, it just shows that he is truly a great threat. But one last thing I want to talk about when it comes to Ouroboros. What is his connection to the Celestial Realm? To give an idea, Ouroboros' main plan is to utilize all of these worlds that have been connected by Arity as fuel as he invades the Celestial Realm from the Infernal Realm, bringing it chaos, destruction, excitement, in his words, as he believes the Celestial Realm is boring, as it is peaceful and knows no strife. What is really interesting is that the Celestial Realm this is not a theory, the Celestial Realm is confirmed to be Earth, where us, the players, reside. He intends to invade Earth. Now, something really interesting to think about is Ouroboros, again, claims that the Celestial Realm is a world that knows no strife. That is a world that knows only peace and happiness, and he wants to bring that chaos to it. But you know just as well as I do, especially with current events, which I'm definitely not going to get into, this is not that type of video, but with current events and how our history as humanity has developed, we are not a peaceful world. We have had our fair share of strife, conflict, and death. So that leaves three potential avenues for what exactly Ouroboros is planning. Ouroboros either is ignorant in his information about the Celestial Realm, in that he does not fully understand Earth as it is, and he might get sorely disappointed whenever he realizes that the Celestial Realm is not exactly what he believes it to be. The second idea is that Ouroboros does know that does understand the conflict that our world has, but sees it as so insignificant that what destruction and excitement and chaos he could bring is so much greater than what we have experienced, and would completely shape the very world we know today, which is honestly an even more horrifying prospect than it would originally be.
But what'll happen to you?
The third option, and probably the one that is not intended, but is still something to think about, is that this entire game is completely a what-if scenario, and
Right.
the true timeline of events for Bravely Default is that our heroes failed, and Ouroboros successfully invaded the Celestial Realm, which is why our world has chaos, strife, destruction, and, of course, in his words, excitement. I doubt this is exactly what the developers were going for, and we're probably going for more of the second interpretation of events. But these are all very important to mention, and I wanted to make mention of it here. Especially because the first example that I showed, it would be really interesting and funny that Ouroboros, an entity that we know is very smart and can read people's minds and can mimic people and has connected countless worlds together and can destroy them on a whim, is ignorant of what exactly his real plan is. Either way, though, I believe it's the second scenario, but feel free to believe what you will. Now, one thing I'm sure many people who are veterans of this series were sorely disappointed to not see on our first go-around against this boss fight. What is behind us in the background? Ouroboros points it out as the Celestial Realm, and yet, in my video, it was just a void of black. Well, to talk about behind the scenes a little bit, it was mostly because my camera didn't work, and so the game was trying to read a camera and couldn't find one, so it just filled in the background with black. Now, why do I say camera? Well, if you have a working 3DS camera, which, guess what? Right after I finished working on the final boss episode for the series, I got my hands on a working 3DS that had a working 3DS camera. So I got to actually showcase what exactly this is supposed to look like. So I'll go ahead and have that on screen shown here. Yeah, it's pretty funny, but this is exactly what it's supposed to showcase. During the final battle, just in general, you watch yourself, the player, in the background. Ouroboros is this close to obtaining his goal, and you can watch as your heroes, your warriors of light, are defending not only countless versions of their world, but also yours, just mere inches away from your screen, mere inches away from our home. It really sells the threat of Ouroboros perfectly, as again, he is just so close to obtaining his goal and seeing his dream fulfilled. But now we have reached the true ending, and we are about to watch the credits go once again. So, instead of doing that, I instead want to talk about a few last things before we end for today. So, let's go ahead and dive into that.
And dearest treasures.
Before we end for today, I want to go over Bravely Default's ending, my opinions on it, and what information it leaves us with. Both the normal and true ending for this game leaves a lot up to interpretation, and that can be frustrating for some players, especially since in the over 10 years that this game has existed, and with multiple spin-offs and a sequel, we still don't have an exact answer to everything shown off during the ending. Let's first begin with what we 100% know happened after Ouroboros was defeated. On Grand Ship, the Warriors of Light had to decide on what world they wished to go back to. We know, thanks to the existence of Egil being at Kaldisla, that Tiz, Onyes, and Idia all went back to their original home, World 5. We see that Brave recovered from his injuries after the battle with him in Chapter 4, and that Alternus also survived the fall from Grand Ship. Onyes continues to be a Vestal, but takes on the burden of tending to all 4 crystals rather than just the Wind Crystal. But what happened to Ringabel? We see a shot of him with a flower walking across Grand Ship's deck, but when this takes place or in what world isn't exactly clear. Before I give my thoughts on Ringabel's fate, let's switch gears and take a look at some of the other unanswered questions that the ending of the game leaves us with. From this point on, this is all conjecture made by me and certain portions of the Bravely community. Nothing said here has been confirmed, and please feel free to post your own interpretations and theories in the comments if you like. Anyways, to understand anything that I am about to talk about, I first need to explain the Bootstrap Paradox. To give a very abbreviated version of this paradox, basically, it says that if you were to go back in time and kill your grandfather before he had children, how would you be born to go back in time to kill your grandfather? A person or object is sent back in time that creates an infinite loop, eventually making it difficult or even impossible to discern the origin of the timeline. But why does this matter? Well, because this paradox helps us understand what exactly the Infernal Realm, where Ouroboros was trapped, really is. We know that the Infernal Realm exists outside of time and space, meaning that it doesn't exactly obey the same rules of reality that the countless versions of Luxendark or the Celestial Realm does. This is important to note because this information helps us piece together a timeline for 2 important characters, Lord Derosso and the Angel. Lord Derosso obtained his immortality after hearing a voice ring in his ear when he was younger, saying these words, "Accept me, and I shall grant life everlasting. Though it shall be filled with grief, thou shalt have all eternity to wreak vengeance upon thine enemies." This is the same line of dialogue that Lord Derosso recites just before he sacrifices himself to seal Ouroboros' immortality. Lester needs to be an immortal for the events of the game to play out, but the only time that line is said is when he's about to die in the final battle. The best way to explain this is that the effects of the Infernal Realm somehow bestow Lord Derosso's powers onto every other version of himself in every world, allowing them to become immortal and help lead to the final battle where he will eventually die, bestowing his gift again. This is an example of the Bootstrap Paradox, as there is no clear origin point for this event, creating an infinite time loop, but it does solve the question of how he got his immortality. The Infernal Realm can also be used to explain how the Angel communicated with every single world, along with the Celestial Realm. She too has to bestow her knowledge of the Evil One and the Harrowing to Liliana and Lester in every world. So, the version of Onyes that would become the Angel must have found herself in the Infernal Realm, as that would have been a way for her to physically communicate with every world. She could have also used the pendant within the realm to project herself to every world, as we are never told whether or not Lester and Liliana buried the Angel's body, only that she died soon after their meeting. She could have disappeared right before dying completely. Again, there is room to debate this, as we've never gotten a direct answer to any of this, so if you believe you have a better idea, I would be happy to read it down in the comments. Now, let's segue from the Infernal Realm to talk about the Celestial Realm. I've already mentioned earlier that the Celestial Realm is supposed to be Earth, but I haven't really directly talked about how that connects to Tiz. From a gameplay perspective, Tiz is supposed to be the player's stand-in character. While Onyes is the story's heroine, Tiz acts as a way for the player to immerse themselves with the world, as he's quite a basic character, and with his home being destroyed before you gain control of him, he is a shell of his former self, giving the player the ability to shape him as they see fit. This doesn't mean that Tiz isn't his own person, though. There are remnants of his personality, as we see Tiz struggle with trauma surrounding Till's death and the destruction of Nerende. We see the world of Luxendark through Tiz's eyes, and we support Onyes' actions throughout the game no matter what. To give a timeline of events regarding Tiz and the player, following the creation of the Great Chasm, a mortally wounded Tiz stumbles his way through the Nerende Ravine shortly before succumbing to his wounds. The angel's pleas from the AR card in the intro and Eri's sister guide us to Tiz's corpse, where we inhabit him. 1 week later, Tiz awakes in Carl's Inn, where the game begins, and we have direct control of Tiz's actions. While Tiz's thoughts and words are still his own, his actions aren't, as those are controlled by us from that point onward. Mephilia is able to sense that Tiz isn't who he seems to be just before she dies, but is unable to elaborate. Hints about Tiz being inhabited by a Celestial are put away until the end of the game, until Ouroboros realizes that Tiz harbors the player within him. Tiz never seemed to know he had a Celestial within him, but he also understands when it is time to give up the player's control and die peacefully. Whether Tiz did know he was dead or not, we don't know. But I personally don't think so. There's a half-year time skip from the battle with Ouroboros to Tiz dying, and I like to think that he spent that time coming to terms with his inevitable fate, rather than trying to hold on to a soul that wasn't his for as long as possible. But with that, let's get on to the final note I want to discuss before we end for today. Let's talk about Ring a Bell and Eri. Going back to the ending cutscene, the only other shot I haven't talked about yet is one where we see a version of Alternus Dim coming to the aid of Tiz, Idia, and Agnes, who were losing a battle with... Eri? How can Eri be here if we killed her in the Dark Aurora? Well, there are once again two potential answers to this question, both being equally viable. But instead of looking at the Infernal Realm for answers, we have to look at a book that came out soon after Bravely Default's release in Japan, the Pocketbook of R. Now, I want to state this up front right now. These books were never officially translated to English, meaning that Westerners only have fan translations to go off of when reading this novel, so anything mentioned from it should be taken with a grain of salt. Also, whether these books are canon to the main game or not is still up in the air, as in my research, I couldn't find any sources that confirmed nor denied its canonicity. But, for the sake of this first theory, we are going to assume that the Pocketbook of R is canon. To give a brief summary of the novel, Ring a Bell decides to return to his home of World 6 after he helps kill Ouroboros to mourn his Idia's death and help rebuild Eternia. But when he attempts to do so, he finds himself in a new version of Luxendark, where the events of the main game start to repeat themselves once more. Eri also appears in this world, but she doesn't bear numbers on her wings, but instead having an infinity symbol on them. Ring a Bell eventually joins his old companions on another quest to awaken the crystals, but this time, he attempts to not only save the lives of every Eternian officer he can, but also tries to keep the crystals from going out of control. Ultimately, he is successful, and he discovers that the Infinity version of Eri was actually a last-ditch creation made by Ouroboros just before he died. This Eri lacked any real purpose, and just followed her basic instinct to awaken the Holy Pillar despite not knowing why. Eventually, Ring a Bell was able to convince her to choose her own path in life, and they set off together to return to World 5 to reunite with Ring a Bell's old friends. But what does this have to do with the ending? Well, if Pocketbook of R is canon, then we know what happened to Ring a Bell, and it means that he isn't the Alternus we see fighting the larva Eri in the ending. The Infinity Eri also isn't the larva Eri, since she is friends with Ring a Bell by the end of Pocketbook of R. So, if that's the case, what are we seeing? Honestly, I think this scene is pretty easy to explain. Who's to say that the Infinity Eri wasn't the only Eri Ouroboros made before he faded away? If so, the Eri we see in the ending is just another one that was made to begin the cycle again in a random new world. Alternus is also easy to explain, as this scene finally shows a version of the Dark Knight that had the courage and the strength to stand up to Eri and protect the ones he loves. In a way, this Alternus has atoned for his other versions by being the one who saved Idia from the Evil One. However, if you don't believe the Pocketbook of R is canon, there is a slightly altered theory that you can hold on to, though it requires me diving into a bit of Bravely Second spoilers. If you haven't played Bravely Second or plan to in the future, skip to this time shown right now. In Bravely Second, we are told that Ring a Bell joined the Dimensional Bureau, which deals with very powerful threats that endanger countless worlds. It isn't out of the realm of possibility for this organization to recruit Ring a Bell, as he now has experience traveling across multiple Luxendarks, And if multiple Ares still exist, chaining worlds together aimlessly now that their lord is dead, it would make sense for him to be sent to hunt them all down, giving Ringabel the chance to atone for his failure to save his Idia. Now, this theory has a few more holes in it than the other one, but it can still hold weight. Either way though, Ringabel and Ares' fate are tied together across multiple worlds, making them one of my favorite duos in gaming history. And with that, we find ourselves back at the title screen after going through the game a whole second time, now with anything I missed and everything I wanted to discuss covered. But we still aren't done yet, as there's still a few more things to do before we end off for good. So, with that said, next time on Bravely Default, we say our final goodbyes to the world of Luxendark.